part. We now come to the preliminary clauses, clauses 1 and 2. The question is that clause 1 and clause 2 stand apart. Phil Twyford.
Speaking to the title and commencement clauses, as we draw this debate towards its inevitable conclusion. It's traditional at this time in the debate to really make proposals about alternative titles for the bill, and I don't think the suggestion from the government whip that it be called the blah 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 bill is a very sensible suggestion. But on this side, you'll soon hear that we have some constructive proposals for the renaming of this bill. And I, for one, would like to start off by proposing that this bill be called the State House Sell-Off, open bracket, Charter for Corruption, close bracket, bill. And that title conveys, I think, two of the critical themes that have been discussed in this debate. And that is that for all the blather and the spin that we hear from the government benches and from the ministers, that this is about social housing reform, it's actually, let's be brutally honest about it, this is an old-fashioned privatisation program of billions of dollars of publicly owned land and housing. That's all it is. Bill English has decided that the government has no business owning land and housing for the purposes of state housing. He simply wants to get it off his hands. He'll sell it to anybody who wants it, Mr. Bishop. First it was the Salvation Army, then they said they didn't want it, then he thought the iwi would buy it, they said they only wanted it if they could have it for free, and now the government is hawking around these billions of dollars of assets to anybody who'll take them, and they're meeting with merchant bankers and PPP outfits and banks and consultants, property speculators, financiers, and the latest on Bill English's wish list is that big private equity funds will see this as an opportunity to establish a business model like the retirement village companies in New Zealand. And nothing could be more crazy to think that the retirement village business model by which companies like Somerset and Ryman make huge dollars by working over the wealthiest quartile of the New Zealand community, the wealthiest 25% of New Zealanders who end up pouring their life's assets into these retirement villages. Nothing could be more different than the job of actually delivering decent, affordable social housing and state housing to the 5 to 10% of the poorest and most struggling New Zealanders. It's obvious that that business model would not work in terms of state housing unless, and here's the kicker, the government is prepared to pour unlimited volumes of taxpayer subsidy directly into the pockets of those companies. But you know what? That's probably exactly what Bill English is thinking of doing. Because how else would those companies make the kind of returns that they currently make on their assets in the retirement village sector? Something like they typically make something like 25% return on their assets. They are highly successful property development companies. How would they make that kind of return on the provision of social housing in New Zealand? Only with massive and ongoing public subsidies. So that's the other possible title for this bill, sir. It's the snouts in the trough for the National Party's mates social housing sell-off bill. And I think that's it's sad that we've got to this point, but the way that the government has handled this whole process over the last 2 years has made the public very cynical. It's stripped away any pretense that this is about building up a more diverse and innovative community housing sector. And the community housing sector are alive to that. They feel like they've been manipulated, lied to, and used by this government as a way of kind of dressing up a highly unpalatable policy, the privatisation and the flogging off of billions of dollars of land and housing that have been paid for over generations.
Mr. Chair.
Chris